Our top focus in this hour, the US Supreme Court has now overturned the historic Roe v. Wade ruling. What does this mean? Abortion could now become illegal in at least 22 US states, ending nearly 50 years of a precedent, which means that more than 36 million women could lose their access to abortion. Until now, abortion in America was guided by the landmark Supreme Court case, that is Roe v. Wade. This 1973 case decided that access to abortion is a constitutional right. The 1992 ruling Planned Parenthood versus Casey further upheld it, which said that women can get an abortion until the fetus is viable, which is usually around the 22 to 24 weeks mark. The ruling was overturned by a conservative majority ruling. Those who were in favor in overturning were Justices Samuel Alito, Clarence Thomas, Neil Gorsuch, Brett Kavanaugh and Amy Coney Barrett. It is important to note that the latter three justices were Trump appointees, that is a former US president. Justice Thomas first voted to overrule Roe 30 years ago. While Chief Justice John Roberts did not join the opinion, he agreed with the majority that the Mississippi abortion restriction at issue in the case should be upheld. But in a separate opinion, he argued that the court should not have overturned Roe. Meanwhile, Justices Stephen Breyer, Sonia Sotomayor and Elena Kagan, the liberal wing of the court, essentially dissented. And this is what the majority judgment said, and I quote, "Abortion presents a profound moral issue on which Americans hold sharply conflicting views. The Constitution does not prohibit the citizens of each state from regulating or prohibiting abortion." That is what the majority verdict says. Let's explain now what this means. Overturning the historic Roe v. Wade judgment means that the US will now join countries that restrict abortion rights. Since 1994, only 3 countries have done this, namely Poland, El Salvador and Nicaragua. So the United States is now joining this group. Now, for more analysis, joining us now is our correspondent Jessica Stone. She has been outside the US Supreme Court reporting for us since the judgment was announced. Jessica, tell us, what's the mood like around you? This, of course, is a judgment that, in a sense, has and will continue to divide America. We've seen some impassioned speeches on both sides of the spectrum. Tell us what's happening around you at this point.
Well, some of those impassioned speeches, in fact, are going on behind me just in front of the court. In the past 2 hours since we've had that decision, that landmark decision handed down by the U.S. Supreme Court, we have seen this crowd only grow. It has remained peaceful, and you just heard a swell of support there. Typically, we have seen the protesters on either side of the issue be separate. They are occasionally talking to one another, but we have also seen a very big police presence. In fact, just about an hour ago, I saw additional police officers walk in to protect the Capitol. To my left, there are additional U.S. Capitol Police buses, and behind the Supreme Court, the same. And this is very different from what we saw on January 6th, where there was not enough preparation, visible preparation for the events that unfolded on that day. So it appears right now that the police here are ready, and they need to be ready throughout the weekend, because we know that there are strong feelings on both sides of this issue, which was handed down, taking away the right to an abortion. Now, I want to correct one thing for your viewers. There has never been a constitutional right to an abortion. However, abortion was made legal by Roe v. Wade 50 years ago, based on the precedent that the Constitution guaranteed a right to privacy. That has been struck down, and that means that not only abortion rights are at stake in future court decisions, but additional court and legal precedents set after that decision. That goes from the right to use contraception, the right to marry as a gay person. And so these opinions and these laws, these decisions, I should say, that have been made by this U.S. Supreme Court are also now staging to have additional decisions in the future. At least that's what we're reading from Justice Thomas.
Jessica, I believe the U.S. President Joe Biden is currently addressing the world on this crucial issue. Let's listen in.
That is already recognized. They didn't limit it, they simply took it away. That's never been done to a right so important to so many Americans. But they did it. It's a sad day for the court and for the country. 50 years ago, Roe v. Wade was decided and has been the law of the land since then. This landmark case protected women's right to choose, her right to make intensely personal decisions with her doctor, free from the interference of politics. It reaffirmed basic principles of equality, that women have the power to control their own destiny, and it reinforced a fundamental right of privacy, a right of each of us to choose how to live our lives. Now, with Roe gone, let's be very clear. The health and life of women in this nation are now at risk. As chairman and ranking member of the Senate Judiciary Committee, as vice president and now as president of the United States, I've studied this case carefully. I've overseen more Supreme Court confirmations than anyone today, where this case was always discussed. I believe Roe v. Wade was the correct decision as a matter of constitutional law and application of the fundamental right to privacy and liberty in matters of family and personal autonomy. It was a decision on a complex matter that drew a careful balance between a woman's right to choose earlier in her pregnancy and the state's ability to regulate later in her pregnancy. A decision with broad national consensus that most Americans of faith and backgrounds found acceptable, and that have been the law of the land for most of the lifetime of Americans today. And it was a constitutional principle upheld by justices appointed by Democrat and Republican presidents alike. Roe v. Wade was a 7-2 decision, written by a justice appointed by a Republican president, Richard Nixon. In the 5 decades that followed Roe v. Wade, justices appointed by Republican presidents from Eisenhower, Nixon, and Reagan, George W. Bush, were among the justices who voted to uphold the principles set forth in Roe v. Wade. It was 3 justices named by one president, Donald Trump, who were the core of today's decision to upend the scales of justice and eliminate a fundamental right for women in this country. Make no mistake, this decision is a culmination of a deliberate effort over decades to upset the balance of our law. It's a realization of an extreme ideology and a tragic error by the Supreme Court, in my view. The court has done what it has never done before, expressly take away a constitutional right that is so fundamental to so many Americans that had already been recognized. The court's decision to do so will have real and immediate consequences. State laws banning abortion are automatically taking effect today, jeopardizing the health of millions of women, some without exceptions. So extreme that women could be punished for protecting their health. So extreme that women and girls were forced to bear their rapist's child. With the child, a consequence. It just stuns me. So extreme that doctors will be criminalized for fulfilling their duty to care. Imagine having a young woman have to carry the child of incest as a consequence of incest. No option. Too often the case. The poor women are going to be hit the hardest. It's cruel. In fact, the court laid out state laws criminalizing abortion that go back to the 1800s as rationale. The court literally taking America back 150 years. This is a sad day for the country, in my view. But it doesn't mean the fight's over. Let me be very clear and unambiguous. The only way we can secure a woman's right to choose, and the balance that existed, is for Congress to restore the protections of Roe v. Wade as federal law. No executive action from the president can do that. And if Congress, as it appears, lacks the votes to do that now, voters need to make their voices heard. This fall, we must elect more senators and representatives who will codify women's right to choose into federal law once again. Elect more state leaders to protect this right at the local level. We need to restore the protections of Roe as law of the land. We need to elect officials who will do that. This fall, Roe is on the ballot. Personal freedoms are on the ballot. The right to privacy, liberty, equality, they're all on the ballot. Until then, I will do all in my power to protect a woman's right in states where they will face the consequences of today's decision. While the court's decision cast a dark shadow over a large swath of the land, many states in this country still recognize a woman's right to choose. So, if a woman lives in a state that restricts abortion, the Supreme Court's decision does not prevent her from traveling from her home state to the state that allows it. It does not prevent a doctor in that state from treating her. As the Attorney General has made clear, women must remain free to travel safely to another state to seek care they need. My administration will defend that bedrock right. If any state or local official, high or low, tries to interfere with a woman's exercising her basic right to travel, I will do everything in my power to fight that deeply un-American attack. My administration will also protect a woman's access to medications that are approved by the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, like contraception, which is essential for preventative health care, mifepristone, which the FDA approved 20 years ago to safely end early pregnancies and is commonly used to treat miscarriages. Some states are saying that they'll try to ban or severely restrict access to these medications. But extremist governors and state legislators are looking to block the mail or search a person's medicine cabinet or control a woman's actions by tracking data on her apps she uses are wrong and extreme and out of touch with the majority of Americans. The American Medical Association, the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists wrote to me and Vice President Harris stressing that these laws are not based on evidence and asking us to act to protect access to care. They say by limiting access to these medicines, maternal mortality will climb in America. That's what they say. Today, I'm directing the Department of Health and Human Services to take steps to ensure these critical medications are available to the fullest extent possible. And the politicians cannot interfere in the decisions that should be made between a woman and her doctor. And my administration will remain vigilant as the implications of this decision play out. I've warned about how this decision risks the broader right to privacy for everyone. That's because Roe recognized the fundamental right to privacy that has served as a basis for so many more rights that we've come to take for granted, that are ingrained in the fabric of this country. The right to make the best decisions for your health. The right to use birth control, a married couple in the privacy of their bedroom, for God's sake. The right to marry the person you love. Now, Justice Thomas said as much today. He explicitly called to reconsider the right of marriage equality, the right of couples to make their choices on contraception. This extreme and dangerous path the court is now taking us on. Let me close with 2 points. First, I call on everyone, no matter how deeply they care about this decision, to keep all protests peaceful. Peaceful, peaceful, peaceful. No intimidation. Violence is never acceptable. Threats and intimidation are not speech. We must stand against violence in any form, regardless of your rationale. Second, I know so many of us are frustrated and disillusioned that the court has taken something away that's so fundamental. I know so many women are now going to face incredibly difficult situations. I hear you. I support you. I stand with you. The consequences and the consensus of the American people, core principles of equality, liberty, dignity, and the stability of the rule of law demand that Roe should not have been overturned. With this decision, the conservative majority of the Supreme Court shows how extreme it is, how far removed they are from the majority of this country. They've made the United States an outlier among developed nations in the world. But this decision must not be the final word. My administration will use all of its appropriate lawful powers, but Congress must act. And with your vote, you can act. You can have the final word. This is not over. Thank you very much. More to say this in weeks to come. Thank you.
Mr. President, do you still have confidence? Do you still have confidence? Right, that of course was the US President Joe Biden giving his take on the judgment that of course was passed earlier today in America, where the Supreme Court overturned the landmark Roe versus Wade judgment, holding that there is no longer a federal constitutional right to an abortion. Now, to understand better what the US President's statement means, we still have our correspondent Jessica Stone reporting for us from outside the Supreme Court. Jessica, you've been, of course, tracking all the updates for us. I want to ask you, President Biden made his stance pretty clear. Does it help the people? That, of course, is the big question. But he did say that this is a sad day for America. He said it's the saddest day in nearly 150 years. It takes America back nearly 150 years. He said that he also appealed to the people on the streets to keep all protests peaceful. He said that this judgment upsets the balance of law. Tell us what you make of it.
Well, I think that the U.S. president, no matter what party or position in his term he holds or she holds, has to reflect the emotions of the moment. And I think that's what President Biden was doing, whether it's a school shooting or an overturning of a landmark Supreme Court decision. This president has been a long supporter of abortion rights across this country. He was the very chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee who interviewed many of these candidates, including Clarence Thomas, who wrote those opinions, concurring opinions with today's judgment. And he has strong feelings on this issue. And I think he wanted to tap in with what he had to say with those who were very disappointed at this ruling. I did find it very poignant that he called for peaceful protest. And I really thought that what he had to say at the very end is worth echoing. He said, this decision must not be the final word. Congress must act. With your vote, you can act. You can have the final word. This is not over. And that's what a lot of abortion rights supporters wanted to hear today, that the fight is not over to keep their rights and to
Jessica,
regain their rights.
Before we let you go, you've raised a very interesting point. So right before I let you go, I want to talk about that point that you've raised, that this is not over. Congress must intervene. Explain to our viewers what can be done from this point from a legal standpoint.
Well, what's likely to be done is that this will go to the state capitals as state law, and U.S. citizens, when they go to the ballot box, will literally be voting on abortion rights in terms of law. They'll be electing leaders based on their positions on abortion, and this will go to the people and away from the courts, which is what Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, a supporter of abortion rights, said many years ago as she was reflecting on the significance of Roe v. Wade. Even though she supported its outcome, she felt it did take away from a national consensus on abortion rights. And it's going to be messy, but that appears to be where we're headed now.
Absolutely, Jessica. Thanks so much for all those inputs. We'll, of course, continue to track this story. Thanks for joining us today on WION. And now for more analyses, we are being joined by Nicole Brener-Schmitz, a Democratic strategist from Washington, D.C. Nicole, thanks so much for joining us. Now, let's talk about the big news of the day. Many are calling this a dark day in U.S. history, while others are rejoicing. This is a topic that has divided America. The judgment essentially squashes any federal constitutional right to an abortion in America. Tell us what this means for the landscape of women's reproductive health.
Yeah, well, it is indeed a dark and sad day today. And while this is an issue that continues to be reported as hot button, it's not as divided divisive as it seems. I mean, the majority of Americans believe that Roe should stand. The majority of Americans believe that Roe v. Wade should be the law of the land. And what we're going to see now is this return to states. And this isn't the end for either side. Obviously, those of us who are pro-choice need to make sure that we are communicating with the voters so that they understand what's at stake and what needs to happen in governors' races, in state legislatures, in thousands of elections across this country in November. But the other side is going to continue their work too. They are going to try to continue to strip freedoms away from the women of America. And there are some old laws in some states where this can be prosecuted, women can be criminalized. I mean, this is a very drastic ruling by the Supreme Court to strip women of America of their constitutional freedoms.
Right, absolutely, Nicole. Now, the U.S. president has made his stand very clear. He has said that this verdict has set America back by nearly 150 years. He has called this verdict a sad day for the country. Let's talk about the situation on ground and the way forward. There is a bigger fear here that this doesn't ban abortion, but essentially access to safe abortion. Are authorities at all worried about women seeking unsafe methods or procedures?
Well, certainly we're in a different era than we were in 1973. So the concern, I think, lies in the fact that there might be availability to order certain kinds of pills and that they're not going through FDA regulations. And then if you're fearful when something happens about going to the hospital because you're afraid that you're going to get thrown in jail. So these are the ramifications. What this is doing is making it a purely economic issue almost, because women of a certain means are going to be able to access safe abortions, both because they have the financial means to pay for it, to travel if they need to, because their state doesn't have anything, and also because they have maybe jobs that provide them sick days and leave. And if you're in a certain economic structure, then you're not going to be able to afford all of those things. You may not have a job that has that kind of freedom. And so we're going to see a lower socioeconomic class of women that are forced to carry these pregnancies to term against their will. And what we have to remember, too, is the majority of abortions in America are had by women who are already mothers.
Right.
These are decisions they're making for their families.
Absolutely, Nicole. Thanks so much for all those inputs. In fact, even the U.S. president said that this decision, or rather this verdict, is likely to hit the poor women the hardest. We'll, of course, continue to track this story. We have our New York correspondent, Susan Tehrani, also with us. We'll come back on the other side of this short break.